Everyone wanted to know how we didn't find her. I'm thinking, how do we defend this? But it was easy to defend, because when anyone saw a video of what he had done and what he had created and the steps that you had to take to get down into this dungeon, everyone understood how you would not find it.
Katie Beers was born on December 30th, 1982, in West Islip, New York. Her mother, Marilyn, had a one-night stand and, as a result, Katie's biological father was not known. Katie and her half-brother, John, grew up in a neglectful environment which was unstable and chaotic. When Katie was a baby, Marilyn often left her and her brother with their godparents, Linda and Sal Ingaleri. For several years, she bounced from town to town, living with her mother, grandmother, and the Ingaleris, whom she called her aunt and uncle. Katie endured horrible conditions no matter where she went. Her grandmother could not afford to care for her, and when she was at her mother's house, she would sleep on a mattress on the floor, surrounded by garbage. Sal and Linda treated Katie like a slave. Linda had her constantly doing chores and running errands instead of doing homework or playing outside like the other kids. Sal would physically abuse her and force her to endure unspeakable acts. She frequently missed school and stopped going altogether after being sent home several times for head lice. The school then filed an educational neglect charge, an action that automatically started a Child Protective Services investigation. CPS supposedly investigated the situation over a period of years with no action taken. Neighbors said that one time Linda chased the CPS caseworker away, screaming at them. John Esposito was born on May 19, 1940. He was only 3 pounds, and the doctors didn't expect him to survive. From the descriptions of him as a child and young adult, it's likely that he was on the autism spectrum or developmentally disabled. As an adult, he didn't really act his age. He had video games in his home, a pool in his backyard, and a basketball hoop in his driveway. John Esposito was very fond of children, particularly young boys. He once tried to lure a little boy into his car, but the boy started to cry and Esposito got scared and left. A month later, he was arrested because the security guards recognized him from the previous incident. He told the police that he was, quote, just looking for a friend. He pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor charge of unlawful imprisonment. He had never been in trouble before, so the record was sealed, and he never told anyone about it. He soon found another way to get close to children. He joined a Catholic charity Big Brother program. He was assigned to mentor little brothers, boys who were 10 to 12 years old. This was in the 70s and 80s, when the charity did not screen the volunteers very carefully. He also befriended the boys in his neighborhood. His apartment was described as a toy store, candy store, and amusement park, all in one. Most parents had no problem with John hanging out with their children. He was a well-known figure in the community. He worked in construction, so he often helped people with their home projects. He was always ready to lend a hand, whether it was carrying groceries or shoveling snow. They thought he was a good man, doing charity work and taking care of his little brothers. He liked to spoil the kids with presents and fun activities. He would bring them to arcades, baseball games, movies, and carnivals. He would buy them toys and electronics, and welcome them to his family events like barbecues or Christmas dinner. Esposito seemed to be a caring and generous friend to the boys. The kids and their parents trusted him and would later even defend him. His little brothers insisted that he was not a bad person and that he had never touched them inappropriately or made them feel uncomfortable. In 1984, John Beers became Esposito's little brother. For years, he and John Beers spent many weekends together. As he had done with the other boys, Esposito would shower John with gifts and take him places. They spent so much time together, everyone started calling them Big John and Little John. John alleges that when he was 12, Esposito told him that he was getting too old and that Esposito needed to find another little brother. By then, the Catholic charity was no longer running a Big Brother program. Esposito applied to a different program, but he was turned down when he lied about his past arrest. He kept seeing John Beers, but was still searching for another little brother. He posted ads and flyers which read, "If you have a son who you think needs a man's influence, I may be able to volunteer my time." But no one responded. He came across Anthony Frey, a boy of 8 from a troubled family, who was acquainted with the Beers. Anthony would sometimes have his little sister tag along, and John sometimes brought his little sister, Katie. It was late December of 1992, and just a couple of days before Katie's 10th birthday. Esposito had a special present for her, a Barbie dream house. With a hefty cost of $170, this toy was a luxury item in its time. Inflation makes that amount equal to $365 today. He returned the next day to put the toy together and suggested to Aunt Linda that he take her out for her birthday to a giant arcade called Spaceplex. Esposito would always take his little brothers there, so this wasn't an unusual request, and Linda had no problem with it. Katie never made it back home after her trip to Spaceplex. Later that day, Linda heard a terrifying message from Katie on her answering machine. She had missed the call by only seconds. "Help me, a man with a knife took me. Oh no, he's coming back." John Esposito called shortly after, sobbing uncontrollably. He claimed that he left Katie for a moment to get some arcade tokens, and that when he came back, she was gone. Katie's family trusted him, but the police had doubts. They treated Esposito as a suspect from the start. If you're wondering how adults could let kids roam around arcades without supervision, or spend hours playing video games at someone's house, you should know that parenting was different back then. Parents were hands-off, giving kids more freedom to explore the world on their own and to deal with the positive and negative consequences of their choices. The police often assumed that a missing child was a runaway rather than a victim of foul play. But the voicemail made Katie's case different. It made the police act fast. Esposito was eager to cooperate with the police. He told authorities what they had done that day. Toys R Us, where he bought Katie a troll doll and a Nintendo game. 7-Eleven for a Slurpee, and Spaceplex, where he gave her $5 for tokens, expecting her to come right back. Panicking, he looked everywhere for her. The police questioned him for hours, and he finally hired a lawyer. To address the public scrutiny, he attended a press conference and, with his lawyers beside him, faced the media. He repeated his story and cried as he said, "I just want to do everything I can to find her." The FBI was called in to analyze the message on Linda's answering machine. They noticed it was completely silent in the background. They expected to hear some traffic sounds if the call was made from a gas station on a busy highway. They suspected that the message was pre-recorded and played back through the payphone. This made the investigation more difficult and brought them no closer to finding Katie. A psychic offered her services to the police, and a local radio station created a song to try to raise awareness. The case of her disappearance was even featured on America's Most Wanted, and dozens of tips poured in. However, none of them led to any breakthroughs. The police were running out of leads and time. But John Esposito had been hiding a dark secret. He used his construction job as a cover, so no one ever suspected anything odd about his home improvement projects. Under the rug in his office closet, behind a bookcase, there was a hidden hole under a thick slab of concrete. It led to a tunnel that connected to 2 tiny rooms with thick concrete walls. The first room had a security monitor and a makeshift toilet. He had installed various types of restraints into the room. In the second, smaller room, there was a little TV on a narrow shelf, and a metal collar was attached to the wall with a chain. There was a thin mattress with a pillow and blankets, and a girl's nightgown on it. He had been preparing this place for Katie for a long time. He had soundproofed the walls so no one would hear her scream. John had deceived Katie about going to Spaceplex. They did get a Slurpee and a video game from Toys R Us, but instead of the arcade, he took her to his house. He said she could try the new game out on his Nintendo. While she was playing the game, he snatched her from behind and dragged her downstairs. He yanked the bookcase and it opened to show the secret space behind. He raised the slab, threw her into the hole, and made her crawl through the tunnel. He led her through the room with the toilet and pushed her into the smaller room. She describes it as the size of a coffin. He soon followed, carrying more blankets, some candy and soda, and a tape recorder. He told her exactly what to say and left her alone to practice. When he listened to the recordings afterwards, he heard her whisper softly at the end, "Big John took me. He has me at his house." He was furious and slapped her, hard. He told her to record the message again while he supervised. He said he was going to use the recording to make everyone believe she was abducted or dead. He said he was going to keep her there forever, and soon everyone would give up and stop searching for her. He grabbed the tape recorder and left her alone in the coffin-sized room, securing the door behind him. She didn't know until years later that he hid the tape recorder somewhere in the larger room and set it to voice-activated mode. She screamed, but no one came. She battered the small door with her feet until it flew open. She looked around the bigger room with the toilet and security monitor. The monitor was connected to a camera pointed at John's driveway, towards the street so that he would be able to see if anyone came to the house. She found a key next to the security monitor, so she took it, later hiding it under her pillow. She also saw something that deepened her fear. There were chains attached to the wall and a strange-looking box. A box with a hole on one side, a lock, and had foam inside. It was a head box. It's believed that Esposito got the idea for the head box from a book that he read. Perfect Victim, The True Story of the Girl in the Box, was a book written about a woman named Colleen Stan, who was abducted and tortured over the span of 7 years. She would be locked up for 23 hours a day, and her head was locked in a box lined with carpet. Satisfied with the recording, John left and went to Spaceplex to put his plan into action. He dialed Linda from the payphone and played the tape he had forced Katie to make. Then he rushed into the arcade, pretended to be frantic, and told staff he had lost Katie in the crowd. He begged them to call the police and report her missing. In the days that followed, Katie would endure unimaginable horrors. She was chained by her neck, but she had the hidden key and was able to secretly unlock herself. Since she was not able to reach the toilet in the other room with the neck chain on, she had to relieve herself at the end of the bed so that she didn't alert Esposito that she was unlocking herself. Big John visited her often, bringing her food, blankets, and toys. But he also hurt her, touching her in ways that made her feel sick and scared, doing the same things that Uncle Sal used to do to her. He told her that she would never leave him, she was his forever. He became someone else, someone sadistic and cruel. She learned to dread the blank look in his eyes. That meant he was going to hurt her again. Esposito had Katie test the bunker by making her scream and make noise, while checking every room in his house for any sound. He was confident that his secret was safe and that no one would ever find Katie. When the police showed up, he acted surprised and innocent and invited them in. He let them search, confident they would find nothing. Meanwhile, Katie saw the police on the TV screen in the bunker. She screamed for help, hoping they would hear her, but no one heard her. The soundproofing worked too well. The cops left, and Katie cried. She begged to be let go, but John always said no. He said he loved her, and that they could have a family together one day, that he would take care of her for the rest of her life. There were no windows, so she had no sense of time. All the days blurred together like a nightmare that never ended. She watched the little TV and saw herself on the news. She tried as hard as she could not to sleep, afraid that John might come back to hurt her, or worse, kill her. One day she heard John coming, but it wasn't the usual time. The 6 o'clock news wasn't on the TV. It was the morning of January 13th, 1993, and John wasn't alone this time. She saw two men in suits behind John, and one of them said softly, "You can come out now, Katie." She was unsure if they were lying or not. They claimed they were cops, and she followed them through the tunnel, suspicious but hopeful. When she reached the hole, she looked up and saw an officer, this one in uniform, who reached down to pull her out. Earlier, John had gathered his family at his lawyer's office to reveal that he knew where Katie was. The lawyers then notified the police, but only after alerting the local news media. As Katie was led from her former prison, she was met with a swarm of cameras and questions. At the police station, she was provided with a fresh set of clothes and some food as they questioned her for hours on end. After the interview, they brought her to the hospital for a thorough evaluation to assess the extent of her injuries. She slept for a long time, and the next morning, a nurse told her she had to stay in the hospital for a few more days and that she must keep the drapes shut, even in the daytime. What the nurse didn't tell Katie was that there were hordes of media camped outside, eager to get a glimpse of her. She had survived a horrific ordeal, and everyone wanted to hear her story. Soon, a CPS caseworker informed Katie she wouldn't be going home. Katie couldn't comprehend why she was being separated from her mother and brother, who were the only people she thought of as safe. She didn't really understand at the time that her mother really wasn't fit to care for her. A plan was made to get Katie out from the hospital without the media seeing her. Katie laid very still on a gurney with a sheet over her whole body until they reached a car where she climbed in. They didn't tell her where she was going, and after what seemed like an eternity, they arrived at a big house in a suburban neighborhood. They told her that this was her new foster family and that they would take good care of her. She looked at the strangers who were supposed to be her new mom and dad and felt a surge of panic. It didn't even feel real, more like she was on the set of a TV show. Her foster parents didn't hesitate to enroll her in school and tried everything to make her feel welcome. But she missed her mother, and she was still scared. The kids at her new school had been told about her situation, but she wished they hadn't. She was behind in school and had to be tutored to catch up. She had been neglected for so long that it was strange for her to have things like regular doctor checkups or to be asked how she was doing or feeling. She was in therapy for a very long time. She had to recount a lot of bad memories to prepare for the coming criminal cases. John Esposito was charged with first-degree kidnapping and 6 counts of child abuse. Katie bravely took the stand to testify. Due to the overwhelming evidence, Esposito took a plea deal, agreeing to plead guilty to first-degree kidnapping in exchange for dropping the child abuse charges. Katie said, quote, "He made me feel dirty. I didn't know what he was going to do to me. Even though now I'm safe, I still worry all the time. I worry about being taken away. I worry that someone might hurt me. John Esposito should go to jail for as long as he can." Sal Angaleri's actions were discovered during the kidnapping investigation, and he was also charged with several counts of child abuse. During the trial, he tried to intimidate Katie and said her failure to look him in the eyes was because she was lying. Katie eventually asked the judge to, quote, "make him stop looking at me that way." But when it was time to give her testimony, she was confident, describing the hardships she endured living with her godparents and how Sal had forced her to do unspeakable things. FBI experts said the underground bunker was very sophisticated and was the result of very careful planning. That in fact it was so well constructed that had Esposito not come forward, it was likely they would have never found Katie. The dungeon was eventually excavated, and it shocked authorities. The public had a morbid curiosity to learn more about the case. The neighbors even charged admission into their backyard so that people could view the excavation process. Some parents even took their kids to the scene, using it to reinforce the idea that it wasn't just stranger danger. Child abusers could look normal and live right next door. But there was a campaign to pressure the media into leaving Katie alone, allowing her to try to live a normal life without cameras and microphones in her face all the time. It was actually successful, and Katie was given the space to heal and grow up. John Esposito was sentenced to 15 years to life and sent to Sing Sing prison. This is one of the oldest prisons in the U.S., constructed in 1824. It also housed the only execution chamber for the state of New York until capital punishment was abolished. It's where the term Old Sparky originated, referring to the electric chair. He would face the parole board 4 times, being denied every time. Shortly after the 4th hearing in 2013, he was discovered dead in his cell. It was determined he died of natural causes due to underlying heart disease. Megan's Law was enacted in 1996 and requires sex offenders to notify authorities before moving to a new area and to provide details of the new location so the resulting database can be available to the public. This law was named after Megan Nicole Kanka, a 7-year-old girl who was murdered by a convicted child abuser who had recently moved to the area where she lived. Sal Ingaleri served 12 years in prison, and after his release in 2006, he violated Megan's Law and was sent back to jail. In 2009, he collapsed and refused treatment by the correctional facility. He went into cardiac arrest and was revived and transported to a hospital where he was pronounced dead. Though there was a custody battle, Katie Beers remained with her foster parents until adulthood. She remains in contact with her mother, Marilyn, but they don't have a close relationship. She is now married with 2 children of her own. The same year that John Esposito died in prison, Katie co-authored a book about her ordeal called Buried Memories. She said the book helped her heal from the trauma, and the fact that both of her abusers are now deceased has given her some form of closure. A 10-year-old Katie gives us this advice: if another little girl or boy were kidnapped or abused, I would advise them to talk to an adult or go to the police. They should talk about everything with their therapist if they have one, and they should try to be brave. There are resources to help children who find themselves in abusive situations. Call the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4A-CHILD or 1-800-422-4453 or visit childhelp.org for more information.